Thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. And I first want to give a shout out to thanking everyone to come today, but specifically to the GIS Lab, to Aaron and Bill Winston and Jennifer Moore for all the help they've given us and collaborative work they've done with us in the past few years, which has been really amazing to have. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. I'm not officially a lightning talk, but I thought I'd start with a lightning strike on the arch. So I'm a 20-minute talk, and it'll probably go pretty fast anyhow. But like Aaron said, I'm from the Sandfox School. I'm trained as an architect. I'm licensed as an architect, and I'm an assistant professor there. But my role is in teaching there, and some of my students from my studio here right now is to also engage architecture within other disciplines. What I'm going to show you is not my work personally, it's collaborative work. It's with primarily John Hole as the chair of the Urban Design Program in the Sandfox School. And we're doing a collaborative multi-year project right now. Some of you may have heard about it. It's currently funded by iCares, called Mississippi, Living with the Great Rivers, Climate Adaptation in the Midwest, Climate Adaptation Strategies in the Midwest River Basins. And this is obviously GIS information. It's a very important map that I just showed it this morning in a talk to some students, that we start with a much larger scale of understanding where we are in a much larger watershed. And this is obviously the Mississippi River Basin with the sub-river basins and just the streams indicated. So a very powerful map about how much water exists in the fourth largest river basin in the world. And we're right in the middle of it. Fortunately, I would say in an optimistic way, we're strategically located right where three pretty amazing rivers come together, three very different rivers, not just the Mississippi, but also the Missouri and the Illinois. Probably most of you are familiar in the room with the map on the left, which is the Fisk map, which is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers map. In the architecture school, we tend to romanticize this map. We think it's a very beautiful map that talks about flow and different things you can do with form. But and it is a beautiful map. But it's also a map that talks about what the Corps of Engineers was trying to do at the time and understand all the different paths of the Mississippi River and where the river was now, and inevitably how to control the river. The map to the right is just another GIS layer that's just extracted again, zooming into the region that just shows the streams. And again, how you can see how many tributaries exist within those three great rivers. So to the kind of what I'm going to talk about today is how we've used this base information, this very important foundational base information to help us do what we're calling multidisciplinary workshops that are engaging issues of flooding and droughts and climate change in the Midwest. So we had a pretty significant flood in 2011, a very significant drought right on the heels of that in 2012, another moderate flood in 2013, but this is up by Alton, so it's still flooding over the agricultural levees. Where are we today? So, I mean, the Missouri River was up high a couple of weeks ago, but it's still a question mark. We're dealing in a much more compressed time frame of events that we could call climate extremes. You can politicize it however you want, climate change, global warming, but it's factual that we are having these events happen back to back to back right on our riverbanks. That's, most of you know, that's right down the riverfront. That's, I don't know if that's Lewis's or Clark's hat that's waving up above the St. Louis riverfront sign. So climate change is not just coastal. That's something we're trying to put forth. John Hole and myself and many others have been involved for a number of years in coastal issues in South Louisiana and work in New Orleans, on the eastern seaboard, around the world, and it tends to be kind of thought about in terms of what does it mean in terms of hurricanes or sea level rise, but we also have these events happening in the Midwest. So what we've embarked upon is this, like I said, ongoing research effort, and it was kicked off 18 months ago. And Bill and Aaron were participants in the workshop where we did a workshop that built upon work that I had been doing in New Orleans for many years, where we were collaborating with Dutch experts, hydrologists, landscape architects, urbanists, of how to position New Orleans in a better understanding how to live with water as an asset for the future. And I was approached, and John Hole as well here at the school, by Dale Morris, who's the senior economist at the Dutch Embassy in Washington, D.C. So they pretty much funded this workshop where we brought in a dozen of the top-notch experts from the Netherlands who are currently part of their Room for the River program, where they're developing strategies of how to live with the rivers in their country. For those of you who don't know, this is actually the Native American term for the Mississippi River, which means Great River, so it's not a horrendous typo that we made in our, we're trying to brand it. It's very important that part of it is going back to where you are, where you're from. But this is our relationship to the river most often. This is a levee out on the Missouri River. This is what I call the three icons of St. Louis, the Gateway Arch, the East Bridge, and the flood wall. And just on the other side of that, we think is the Mississippi. So the premise of the workshop, and then what has developed into our research methodology, is that the great rivers are our history, they're our ecological bank, they're our cultural bank, our financial bank, but they're under stress. They've been redesigned over time. But the greatest continued wealth of those rivers, of course, is water. So we developed a series of kind of opportunities that are very long-term. They're actually not 5-year or 10-year kind of driven. They're probably more 25, 50, and even 100-year term. Everyone in this room might not be on this earth when this stuff happens, hopefully. But it's a long-term, it's a new design condition that starts to really think about a much longer-term proactive approach that's called water-based planning in effect. And like I said, that collaboration is a Dutch-American one. It's multidisciplinary, it's local, it's national, it's international. Many faculty and students from WashU were involved in the workshop. In addition to, I said, about a dozen Dutch as well. And the drawing you can see in the bottom right corner is kind of small. That's one of the Room for the River projects in the Netherlands. And if any of you are interested in kind of sustainable strategies for development along rivers, the Room for the River program is quite a fascinating project because it is a federally adopted program for linking up different projects along the river to not just accommodate for times of flood, but also times of drought as well. Believe it or not, the Netherlands also has similar issues of drought. And what you see here is photographs from the workshop, and this is where I'm getting to why the base information is so important. It's meant to be a very balanced approach. What we did, we invited different stakeholders from many different interest groups. So we had people from the ports here, we had people with environmental interests, agricultural interests, what have you. Strong critics of the Corps of Engineers, and the Corps of Engineers was actually involved as well. So what you can see here is both visits we did out to the sites, but also work in the workshop and presentations as well. And I was digging through my old photos that I had, because some of these aren't, I haven't looked at in a while, and this was the prep room. This was over, if any of you have been over to Steinberg Auditorium, this is our gallery, and to prepare for the workshop, which was a 5-day, very intense effort that had both lectures and these design charrettes and presentations, we generated a series of maps, of base maps that could be used to be drawn over and would really make legible kind of information that you never really see up usually when you see aerial photographs. So this is the kind of the prep of what turned into the war room. And then some more maps, we generate these large, what we call tabletop maps. So the one in the foreground is a land use map. The one in the background is showing where the flood protection and the topography is, and you can see a lot of the other maps pinned up in the background. And then this photograph, which is a little kind of hard to read, but there you can see what I thought was a nice moment where everyone's around kind of talking about what they had drawn, but the base map is used for sketching where you start to where people talk about what both the locals and then experts about different conditions, but there's even also an iPad as well that was where we were also having photographs that we had geo-referenced that we were referring to, that we would be out in the site, and since we're in the room, we went, let's bring that photograph back up. What exact point are we talking about? And then the maps are also great underlays just to be working directly on. So that's on the right is Steven Slavers, who's a phenomenal landscape architect in the Netherlands, and to the left is Pen Nielsen, who actually is he's not a designer. He works with facilitating with the public to get people's heads around what does it mean for these new types of relationships to rivers. Rip Sparks, who used to be he's in Illinois, he's actually giving a talk, I think, Thursday night up in Elsa, which should be really interesting about floodplains. Rip, when we get in our presentations to the working groups themselves. So there again, you can see the maps up to the left. Robert DeConing presenting some of his scenario proposals to the group, getting constant feedback throughout the workshop. Some moments of stress, data going crashing, what am I doing? But moments of kind of teasing others as we work through things. The solitude over there. I think behind the computer is Christian Clerk, who is another amazing was one of our research assistants and really generated with Jonathan Stittleman most of the maps that we did. And of course, a good amount of coffee was consumed during the time. We were fortunate enough, iCares was hosting the then acting Secretary of Department of Interior for Parks and Wildlife. It was Ms. Jacobson came, Mitchell Jacobson, I think was the name. Sorry, the name is passing me right now, but she came to the final presentation, which was great, and passed her thoughts on what she thought about what we're doing. But to the maps. So usually, and it is kind of in the report that we put together, we have this appendix that says mappings, and I look at this and I think it's it's the wrong term. I don't think the GIS data and the information should be always thought of the kind of back of it. It is not the appendix, it's actually kind of consistently throughout it all. So what I'm going to show you, and the reason I want to kind of go through these real quickly is that all of this information, and you can talk to Bill and Aaron, is housed here at the GIS Labs for anyone to access. And the data, the most of it that we got was through East-West Gateway Council of Governments, which is the regional planning body here in St. Louis. And we were able to kind of sequester a couple of big terabyte hard drives of this stuff and then bring it over here. So it's publicly available data, and we've made it into a series of maps, and if anyone's interested with accessing the Illustrator files, the more graphic versions of these, you're more than welcome to talk to me. So we made a series of maps at the regional scale, and then for 3 different specific zones we were looking at. So I'm just going to click through these just to kind of give you some eye candy of what the maps are. So that here's a satellite image with the bluffs. The river is always shown as purple. We just made it so it would pop out. Topography. The interstate highway system, the levee and the flood protection system in red, digital elevation model, the blue is the floodplain, a land cover map, so just red showing what's built, the FEMA flood zones, land use, crop types, which kind of hits hard on yellow is corn, green is soy, prime farmland, ecological significance. East-West Gateway is actually using this. I'm not quite sure exactly what it is, but they're trying to locate very ecologically significant areas for future planning. Hydrologic soils, flooding frequency, ponding frequency, primary rock type, soil taxonomy, the watersheds, the different scales of watersheds. And I think one of the most beautiful maps is the water tables. You can see over in the American bottom in St. Louis, the former paths in the Mississippi River. So we have all these maps, and the people that come in at the workshop all read these maps differently. Some are very visually oriented, some are very information or data or not visually oriented. And then you supply kind of just, so many of them is kind of overwhelming. But it takes people like Steven Schlabers and others to kind of cut through these and find the critical sets of information that can help frame the design issues that are going to be studied in the workshop. So what Steven found, he took 2 maps, and first on the right here, again, we're referring back to the different kind of scales, the bigger scales that are happening at the river basin level. But he said, okay, I like the digital elevation model drawing, that's a good one. This one's very interesting, the land cover, but I want you to take those 2 and combine them. And that's when it becomes a powerful moment, because you start to then see how much red exists within blue, right? So if you look at East St. Louis, up at the top, that's Wood River, chemical refinery that's in the floodplain. South of that is U.S. Steel and Granite City, down to East St. Louis. To the west, you see Earth City in the floodplain, and just to the south of that would be the future development of Maryland Heights, and then further south is arguably the longest shopping area in the country, which is in the Chesterfield Bottom. At the same time, the Corps of Engineers, the Dutch version of the Corps of Engineers, Rijkswaterstaat, Eileen Freds from American Rivers, and others were all trying to come up with a series of estimates for how can we start to underpin what would become these scenario design plans by using some sort of scientific data that can help us get to an understanding. So what they did is they generated these drawings on the left, or these charts on the left. And just to be short, in a nutshell, based on climate change predictions that NOAA put out in 2013, the Mississippi River flood levels and flooding in the future, in the year 2050, will go up 3 to 8 feet higher, and droughts will be the same, 3 to 8 feet lower. Which, if you recalculate what that means for a 1 in 100 year flood, that would mean in the year 2050, based on those higher predictions, if you lived in a 100-year floodplain, it would actually be a 1 in 40-year flood, and you'd have a 53% chance of flooding. So we use that, coupled with Staben's ideas, to look at 3 different zones. What we're calling fluvial morphological zones. Architects like to take words and kind of mix them together, but we're trying to define with our ICAS research what that specifically means. One of which was a primary agricultural zone and pooled condition up at Alton with the dams in north. The second one was a levee-protected suburban and future development condition, which is basically Maryland Heights and the Chesterfield Bottom. And the third one is a levee-protected, existing urbanized, some would argue de-urbanized area, and free flow river, which is East St. Louis, to the east of downtown St. Louis. So I'm going to talk about just the agricultural zone, and then I'll pass the mic after that. Fluvial zone 1. So like I said, it's from Alton up and the Mel Price Dams up to the confluence of the Illinois and Mississippi River, into the south bordered by the Missouri River. But pretty much all encompasses the area that was significantly flooded in the 1993 flood. So like I said, in the working groups, that's Robert DeConing again, coming up with a series of impressions, pretty loose, of trying to get your head around it. And then he came up with kind of using GIS maps and mappings kind of in a funny way. He's like, well, it actually kind of resembles the shape of a bald eagle, which is the icon of that area, but it's kind of maybe superficial, maybe not. But so what we developed is in a series of challenges. So there are future agricultural challenges in terms of these floods and droughts, ecological challenges. It's a huge bird migratory and other migratory route. Development strategies, is it just going to continue to be agricultural? The local versus global exporting of crops, and also navigation is a big issue, obviously, through here. And all these photographs on the back are ones that I've taken of that specific area. But key maps that came out of this were ones in what we call potentials, is that it's not just flat out there, right? There's differences in topography. And then there's also different levee protection as well. There's full, Mississippi River protection, but also agricultural levees, which usually are 20-year levees. And we were looking again at those crop conditions, and we were saying, well, what if there's future scenarios for different types of way of farming and occupying this landscape? And then some of the people in the group came up with an idea of a terracing rotational crop strategy that would happen over time, that would start to also use the flood pulses and the nutrient overloads and the sediment that exists with those 2 rivers. So 3 scenarios. First one, don't do anything different, status quo. What are the pros and cons of that? The second one is business as usual but better. You basically take everything, you make it stronger, add some variation within it. And the third one, the most optimum one, we would think, is paradigm change, where climate becomes the driver. And in that one, for the paradigm change, we looked at the different flood levels that would occur within those topographic conditions in different year events. And what it would start to propose is that you could have like a potentially multifunctioning crop cycle. Again, this is long term, that would use both the sediment and the sediment that's coming from the Missouri and the nutrients that come from the Mississippi, and then propose a new type of way of occupying. Again, this is just very, very ideas based, but it's really kind of, I think, important to understand that none of those maps, none of those scenarios, none of that work would have been possible with all the tremendous amount of data that we were able to put together. So again, thank you, and I think that's my 20 minutes.